Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is Malcolm X and the Black Liberation Movement. And we have to talk about Malcolm X and the Black Liberation Movement, Alana McLaughlin. Alana has been with us on many occasions, and I'm sure that she's no stranger to members of our audience this morning. Alana, let me welcome you to the show, as well as to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the activities that you've been involved in since you were with us the last time. I think that you started with us as a youngster of 8 years old, and you've been with us almost consistently since. And I would imagine that many members of our audience are probably amazed to see you now, knowing that you've moved quite a bit through this show since you were 8 years old. Let's talk about your background, education, and other information that might be able to enlighten our audience as to who you are this morning, Alana.
Well, like you stated, my name is Alana McLaughlin. I am an 8th grader at John Early Middle. I am heavily involved in many organizations, and I go to many camps and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I am heavily involved in my church. My school, for instance, I was a cheerleader. I'm in the band. I was a part of the Metro Nashville Public Schools Honor Band and many other organizations of that. And like I said earlier, I'm in the band. I play trumpet and piano. And so basically, I've always had a knack for helping people, I guess, and it's fitting because my father's a nurse, and so I'm always doing community service and helping my neighborhood, like offering tutoring in the summer for some of my peers or some of my neighbors, and etc. And always trying to help the world to the best of my ability.
Very good. And Alana, let's talk about some information in reference to the topic that we're dealing with, Malcolm X and the Black Liberation Movement. I think we've got about half of this segment to sort of give a foundation for the Malcolm X and the Black Liberation Movement. How would you approach that, and how are you planning on dealing with this today?
Well, when you're talking about Malcolm X or the BLA, which is the Black Liberation Army, well, same thing, you really have to sit and think about how you want to approach it, because this is such a sensitive topic. For instance, I almost said Martin Luther King. Malcolm X lost his life for not the BLA, but for his views and etc. And so when we chose this topic, I really had to sit and think, how do I want to go about this? How do I want to portray a man who was loved and hated at the same time? Like, he is unlike any other civil rights leader. For instance, Martin Luther King, he always had praise, and he was known for being loving and peaceful. Malcolm X was the polar opposite. He was known for his eccentric personality and diverting to violence when talking it out wouldn't work. And so it took a lot, and it took a lot of patience and really sitting down and deciding, how do I want to go about this? How do I want to portray a man who was crazily brilliant? And I finally figured out that I'm going to portray him to the best of my ability, and I'm going to praise him when praise is due, and I'm going to point out some of the faults that he had, because there were many. And in talking about the Black Liberation Army, I'm going to give the blunt truth about the bombings and the killings that they did, and that's the only way I can go about it, really.
And so you've got quite a bit of information. What about Malcolm X? Who was Malcolm X in terms of, I know that many people talk about his autobiography, the autobiography of Malcolm X, but give us some little information over the next couple of minutes in terms of his background.
Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little in 1926. He was a husband, a father, a minister, a civil rights activist, a deeply religious man, but also a man who had, who wanted things to go his way. Like, for instance, in 1946, the first time he was ever arrested, he went to jail for larceny and for breaking and entering. And this is when Malcolm X, when Malcolm Little at the time really discovered himself, and he decided that he was going to make an impact on the world, and believe me, he did. He's one of the most influential figures in American and African-American history to this day, years and years after his death. So.
And so in dealing with Malcolm X, and you use the name Malcolm Little,
that's his birth name,
which was his birth name before he became Malcolm X. Why did he decide over the next half minute? Why did he decide to change his name from Little to and put the X behind his name?
I don't know the exact reason of why, but if you're wanting to become a strong and you want someone to respect you, a name like Malcolm Little isn't going to get you far. Okay. So I can see why he changed it.
Okay, so what we'll do, we'll take this first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Okay, now the next segment, we've got 8 minutes. Yeah. What do you want to talk about?
Malcolm X, and I'm ended off with comparing the BLA to like the NAACP.
Okay, that sounds good. And so when we start back, we've got 8 minutes, and you're going to start talking about whatever. Yeah. And so you think
you threw me off. Call me off guard.
Well,
no, but it's okay. You cool.
Okay, but now you got you ready for the second segment, huh?
Yes, sir.
And so what I'll do, I'll just introduce the show again, and welcome back to the show. And we're talking.
And I'll talk a little bit about what I said. Why was the name? Do you know?
Well, simply to mean that the name Little was a slaveholding name, a name that had been given to him by his family, and etc. And so that X meant that he's
getting rid of
that name.
Yeah.
And so he's going to put that in. So Jimmy X and all other kind of X's, you know. And so those were what the X's generally meant.
Oh, okay.
He's got a book out called
The Autobiography of Malcolm X. And his daughter, Isaiah, I know I didn't pronounce that right, but he has 5
Okay,
kids.
save all that for the show now, because if you got that kind of information.
I ain't gonna say her name, I'm gonna say he got 5 kids. Like $3 and 2 cents.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
30 seconds out.
So when he was assassinated, a lot of folks.
His daughter was there to witness his assassination. His second child.
Yeah, you want to talk about the assassination?
Or something. Well, I'm gonna say his.
Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Alana McLaughlin, and she's dealing with Malcolm X and the Black Liberation Movement. Now, Alana, in continuing our discussion dealing with Malcolm X and the Black Liberation Movement, let's look at, during this segment, some of the things that you consider to be influential and important in terms of his life, and perhaps you might want to give some statements in terms of his autobiography autobiographical information.
And so, if you're just tuning in the first segment, I kind of talked about my background in education, and then I went into a little about who Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little, was, and I gave small details about him. He was born in 1926. At the age of 20, in 1946, he went to jail for larceny and breaking and entering, and during his stint in jail is when he joined the Nation of Islam and dropped the name Little and changed it to X, and he did this to kind of show that he was no longer under that hold of the name Little. He was his own person, so it's kind of Xing it out, you know, Malcolm X. And so this was symbolizing that he was a new character. And so when he left jail, he was, you know, part of the Nation of Islam and very heavily religious. And then he decided to really get into Black rights. Now, not for instance, but something I should bring up is that despite, it's a common myth that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X did not like each other. This is totally false. Dr. King, when Malcolm X was assassinated, in a telegram to his wife, or his widow, Betty Shabazz, he even said, even though me and Malcolm didn't always see eye to eye, he still had lots of love and respect for him and thought he was a courageous and a very smart man. And so this was during the time where a lot of people weren't really into the violence thing. this was during a time where Martin Luther King and people like that, Rosa Parks, etc., were in power in this movement, really. And they were spreading love and peace and hair grease and all the good stuff, you know? And it came as a shock to everybody, like, there's this man who's saying, y'all need to get up and start fighting back. And everybody was taken aback, but some people liked this. And this is why Malcolm X is so influential like he is today, because he shined a light on a new path that people were too scared to go down. Because this was the 40s and the 50s when racism was at a high in the U.S. This is when we were scared, or us African Americans, we were scared to speak out. We were scared to really tap into our rights that we knew we had because of the fear of lynchings and bombings and etc. And so Malcolm X stepped into the game, and he really turned things around for a lot of people. And so Malcolm X decided to start speaking and start spreading the word of, he didn't necessarily say all violence, but he said that, you know, even one of his quotes, it goes along the lines of, you know, be respectful, be peaceful, etc. But if someone puts your hands on you, put them in a cemetery. And so he wasn't one to say that you should not have peace, but he more said, if peace doesn't work, have a backup plan, and that backup plan be violence. And so, and this really, really, really made him
notorious,
and it also put his life in danger. For instance, Malcolm X was doing an interview with Ebony magazine, and you're probably familiar with this cover. It's when he's holding a rifle and he's peering out of a window. And he did this because the Nation of Islam was out to kill him. And he even said this in interviews, so I'm not just going off of this. Like, the Nation of Islam really wanted to kill this man. And they wanted to do this not because of what he was preaching, well, partly because of what he was preaching, and another fact because he got tired of the Nation of Islam and wanted to leave, and so he left that and started doing his own thing. And he was still Islamic, yes, but he just wasn't a part of the Nation of Islam. And because of this, he outraged so many people, so many members of the Nation of Islam who were also FBI informants. And mind you, they were already looking at Malcolm X because since he was preaching all this violence and stuff, when stuff would go down with white police officers and etc., of course he would be a prime suspect. Why? Because if he's preaching this stuff, he's probably doing it. And so the U.S. government and the NYPD already had his eyes on him, already had their eyes on him. And with the Nation of Islam being out for his head, it just made a world of trouble. For instance, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X's car was bombed. I think it was about a week before his assassination. I think a couple of days before his assassination, his house was set on fire. And this really scared Malcolm, but it also, it scared him, but it didn't deter him and it didn't surprise him because he knew that there would be a price to what he was preaching. Like, Martin Luther King lost his life because he preached happiness and love and equality, and people who didn't believe in that wanted to get rid of him. And Malcolm X was no stranger to violence of others. Like, for instance, when he was 6 years old, his father was killed by the Ku Klux Klan. He was decapitated in a car accident, and his mother, a few years afterwards, had to be put into a mental hospital because she went crazy after the death of Malcolm's father. And so he was just starting to see a repeat of the childhood experiences that left him an orphan, and the childhood experiences that really fueled the fire for the anger and the burning passion he had in his heart. And so this made him have a whole new outlook on everything that people were doing to him. And that's what really formed the grit that we all know as Malcolm X.
And so in a real sense, Alana, Malcolm X was a contemporary of Dr. Martin Luther King, but one had a different point of view in terms of how you solved the many social problems that were faced in African Americans, especially, but many minorities in the United States of America. And so you can put one on one side and one on the other, and
you can, but I feel as though if you talk about one, it wouldn't necessarily be fair not to mention the other, because even though they were almost polar opposites, they all stood for one common thing: the equality of African Americans. And without the help of both these two very powerful figures, we wouldn't be where we were today. We wouldn't be on television. You and I wouldn't have the freedom that we have right now. And so I think you always have to bring up one when you speak of the other, only to be fair, I guess, because you have to really show both sides of the spectrum. You can't talk about peace for black people without talking about the people who wanted violence for black people, because you may not think it, but they do coincide.
Amen. And we amen that, because it's time for our second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Which is, well, you know,
the Hajj is one of like the 5 pillars. Is it 5 pillars of Islam? I can't name the other ones, but I know that he completed the Hajj, and it's what
he went to Mecca.
He went to Mecca, and it's, well, I can talk about it a little bit. I can talk about what the Hajj was, and how he did it, and how it influenced.
It had an impact upon him, and etc.
Yeah, and how he joined like Sun Islam. Sunni Islam when he left the Nation of Islam. Yeah, I can talk about a little that, and then I'll talk about his death, and then get into the BLA.
Okay, yeah, well, we got 10 minutes, and so the first thing you want to talk about is when it comes
later life / death.
Okay. That's some good information. You really can really handle it. Surprised me.
Oh. 1 minute, Dr. Haney.
Yeah, this is good. That's good information. You're doing an excellent job in reference to this. I'm talking about Malcolm X.
30 seconds out, Dr. Haney.
And you're going to talk about his assassination, his death, you know, something. Okay.
In the Bronx. In the Abaddon Theater.
Thank you, and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Alana McLaughlin, and she's given us some information in reference to Malcolm X and the Black Liberation Movement. Alana, I think the information that you've given so far has really been encouraging in terms of trying to highlight the life and activities of one of the most important individuals dealing with the Black Liberation Movement. I think you've also given us information in reference to Dr. Martin Luther King and others, and that kind of information. So let's see if we can devote this last segment. We've got about 10 minutes to the life and the death and the latter period dealing with Malcolm X, and to try to get in as much information as you care to give us in reference to that, so that our audience can have a better understanding of his activities.
All right, if you're just tuning in the first 2 segments we talked about Malcolm Little, better known as Malcolm X's background, and him joining the Nation of Islam, leaving the Nation of Islam, joining Sunni Islams, and then the Nation of Islam being out for his head because of him, you know, leaving the Nation of Islam and starting to kind of talk not that great about the Nation of Islam, and how it is suspected that the Nation of Islam had help from the NYPD, from the FBI, and the CIA. And so right now we're at that point of Malcolm X's later life, and this is when he completed the Hajj. And if you're not familiar with this, the Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and you're supposed to complete it if you're financially able to. It is from the 8th of some month, I forgot, I am sorry, to sometimes the 13th, but commonly the 12th of that month. And you're supposed to complete it if you can provide for your family while you're gone, and if you can take the time out, if you're physically able. And this is a journey to the Mecca. And so after Malcolm X completed the Hajj, he came back home and he was feeling very renewed, and he was at a good point in his life. He was feeling pretty good, but he didn't know of the terrors that would soon come. Now, I mentioned this in the last subject. A little ways before his death, or I guess the months beforehand, Malcolm X knew he knew he was to be assassinated. He knew that the Nation of Islam was after him. He believed that they had help from the United States government, and he knew that he wasn't going to live that much longer because people wanted his head. White supremacists wanted his head. The Nation of Islam wanted his head. Hey, the government wanted his head. Everybody was out to kill Malcolm X. And so a couple of weeks, I guess about a month before, he was giving an interview to a news station where he basically said, yes, the Nation of Islam is out to kill me. And he told radio stations this, and he let it be known that they were trying to kill him. And Ebony, the magazine, caught wind of this, and they decided, let's dramatize this whole situation by getting him in Ebony. And this resulted in the famous Ebony photo shoot with Malcolm X and Ebony that resulted in the photo where Malcolm X is holding a rifle and he's peering out of a window. And in talking to Ebony, he was basically saying how he would always defend his family and stuff, hence why he was posed with the rifle and, peering out of a window. And this really added a lot of fuel or gas to the fire, and this resulted in his car being bombed and his house being set on fire. And then finally, when Malcolm X was preparing for a speech on Pan-Africanism and black superiority, he was preparing in the Abaddon Theater, which was packed with 400 people, and himself, so I guess 401. And somebody yelled a racial slur towards black people, "Get out of my pocket." So I'm guessing that a black person was in somebody's pocket. I don't really know what the meaning behind that was. But anyway, some of the security guards at the Abaddon Theater in the Bronx were trying to break it up when out of nowhere, people started shooting, and they eventually got Malcolm X. And there are many conspiracy theories about who killed him or why. For instance, the 3 men that were charged, one confessed, but he also signed papers that said that that the other 2 were innocent. And the other 2 spent life in jail, but that one who signed the affidavit saying they were innocent, he got out on bail in 2009, I think, and maintained his innocence up until his death in August of 2009. And so we truly don't know who killed Malcolm X, but we do know that he was shot 21 times, ranging from his shoulders, his torso, upper area, lower body, 21 gunshots. And if you look up photos from that day in the Abaddon Theater, there's chairs knocked over, there's gunshots everywhere, there's bullet holes everywhere. And so it is truly, if you look up photos of Malcolm X, you're bound to see the Ebony cover and you're bound to see the Abaddon Theater photo. But another thing that people find really weird is they couldn't really search the crime scene because the police covered it up so quick. The police cleaned up the crime scene like that after Malcolm X, both, was assassinated. And people find that very weird. And so conspiracy theories range from saying the CIA did it, the NYPD did it, Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam did it, the Nation of Islam did it, a lot of intelligence did it. And so we will never truly know, but we do know that the Nation of Islam was no stranger, and they didn't even try to say that they were innocent in it. Everyone knew that the Nation of Islam was out for his head, but they never naturally confessed to it. But in an interview a little after Elijah Muhammad's death, after Malcolm X's death, Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam, he said, Malcolm Little got what he preached. And then he said, I'm not saying I had any involvement with it, but it's not hard to see that somebody killed him. And when you do think about it, it's a tragedy, yes, but I feel as though if you're preaching controversy, someone's going to try to end that. And, you know, back when Martin Luther King was preaching about equality and stuff, that was considered controversy. Why? Because we lived in a country, and especially in the South, we lived in a part where equality wasn't a thing. No one believed in equality. The founding fathers didn't, and the people of that day didn't. And so you're preaching about something that's so wild, and someone was fed up with that, and so someone decided to end Martin Luther King. And so basically you just how do I explain this? You just have to really decide if you're going to be a martyr for a cause. You really have to decide, is this what you want to give your life for? And Martin Luther King, he decided to be a martyr for his beliefs, and Malcolm X knew he was being a martyr for his beliefs.
What impact do you think that Malcolm X has upon young people like yourself, Lana, over the last minute and a half that we have?
Malcolm X has had impacts on my society, the NAACP, the BLA, which is the Black Liberation Army. He's had impacts on civil rights leaders. He's had impacts on everybody. You may not agree with what he preaches, but even if you don't agree with it, he's still impacting you because you're thinking about it. And he's been in magazines and etc., and he's always praised commonly for his beliefs, but a good deal of the time he's praised not for his beliefs, but for his courage and his strength and his mind, because he was crazy, but he was crazy smart. He knew how to articulate his beliefs and how to share his thoughts, and it may not have been correct to you, but you can't say that he didn't say it pretty well. And so he always knew the right words to use, and he knew exactly what to say. And so Malcolm X, he's shaped our society. He's helped give black people the equality that we yearned for and that we worked hard for and that we deserved. And without him and people like him, I don't think we would be in the spot that we are today.
And Lana, let me say during this last 30 seconds that we have here that we can certainly appreciate the information that you have dealing with Malcolm X, and that the information put Malcolm X in a very, very important category. And I would encourage others to listen to what you have to say. And we'll be back with our audience next week. And we encourage you to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments.
Thank you and good morning.